Hey everybody, in today's video, we're going to be talking about a new protocol called Thorchain and also talk a bit about the problems behind the DeFi and CeFi space right now, and super excited to dig into it. So again, before we talk about Thorchain, I think it's really important to talk a bit about the problems behind certain spaces and understand why Thorchain is a solution. So that's exactly how we're going to start, with a problem-oriented perspective. So we won't go too deep into the problems behind centralized platforms like Coinbase, Binance, Kraken, Gemini, etc., but a lot of people kind of associate three problems with centralized finance platforms. Number one is this idea of custody. In many cases, platforms like Coinbase are actually the ones who hold the crypto in their exchanges, and this idea of ownership is sometimes ambiguous. A lot of people who advocate for privacy and kind of ownership of crypto want non-custodial wallets. Number two is KYC, which simply stands for Know Your Customer. A lot of people don't like the idea of their privacy getting invaded, and Know Your Customer policy is a situation in which US banks and US financial regulations and institutions have to have a certain amount of data so they understand and think that you're not fraudulent. That is simply the KYC process, and usually that includes asking for your ID, SIN number, social security number, blah, blah, blah. Lastly, there's this idea of fees. This intermediary fee that Kraken or these platforms like Coinbase have are relatively expensive, and they make up for it with their great user experience for users. A lot of people don't like that just because there's a high cost associated with decentralized platforms, and that doesn't really go hand in hand. So again, that's kind of the general thought process behind people who don't like CeFi. One key note to make is that I have nothing against CeFi, and I think they're doing a great job when it comes down to increasing the rate of adoption of crypto, and especially at this stage, this is what's needed. So we've covered it really quickly with CeFi platforms. We won't get too deep into that, but what we're going to cover next is DeFi platforms. When you think of DeFi, you think of protocols like Uniswap, SushiSwap, PancakeSwap, etc., and a lot of other swaps. With DeFi specifically, there's a couple of problems and obstacles and challenges that are really hard to solve, and we're going to summarize 4 of them right away. So the first problem has to do with this idea of wrapped assets, and you've probably heard of these terms called wrapped Bitcoin or wrapped ETH or wrapped whatever. Wrapped assets are not actually the assets itself. We need to clarify what wrapped assets mean. When you buy a wrapped asset, you're not actually buying the asset itself. So again, if we were to buy wrapped Bitcoin, we do not actually own Bitcoin, but it's a synthetic that represents the material value of Bitcoin. So that's a bit tricky. Let's look at this with a practical example. If I'm on Uniswap right now and I actually wanted to trade my Bitcoin for Ethereum, I would actually have to have a wrapped Bitcoin. And by doing that, it's not actually the natural or native asset. And another problem is there's not much utility with wrapped Bitcoin itself compared to Bitcoin, so you're not able to do much rather than just actually wrap the asset itself. Don't get me wrong, wrapped assets are a great way of bringing liquidity to different protocols like Bitcoin to Ethereum, but it's more of a kind of a band-aid solution than it is a be-all, end-all solution. So with wrapped assets, simply put, it's just hard to be able to understand the transferability and also just the value behind these native assets because they're not native. Now, what's the second problem with DeFi protocols? Now, another challenge with DeFi is this idea of oracles, which are simply just a fancy way of saying data sources. With DeFi protocols like Uniswap, it's really important to have the exact real-time data of unit prices, of crypto prices. And the reason why this is important is because if you ever have a malfunction or a discrepancy, it makes it really hard to be able to trade efficiently. Most platforms use oracles such as Chainlink, and Chainlink is a great tool because it decentralizes the oracle process. But in this case, it's also really difficult because there are some caveats with Chainlink itself. For example, although Chainlink is highly secure and reliable, it does take some time when it comes down to updating price feeds, and that's sometimes difficult when you want to be able to have an instantaneous price switching and swapping mechanism. Chainlink is also currently working on these off-chain aggregation tools, which I'm really excited to kind of tune in about. Number 3 kind of relates to number 1, which has to do with this idea of wrapped assets, but also this idea of unbridged economies. Think of countries that do not trade with any other country. It's really difficult to be able to increase your GDP, improve your exports and imports, and just go through the process of economic globalization. Now, if we were relating each blockchain to each country, it would prosper and actually make each platform more valuable when they're able to actually communicate with other blockchains really easily and simultaneously. So we all know that Binance Smart Chain has their own blockchain and ecosystem, Solana has their own ecosystem, Bitcoin has its own ecosystem, and Ethereum has its own ecosystem. None of them have the ability to be able to communicate at a natural and native aspect, which makes it really difficult to be able to transfer value through blockchains. Another problem with DeFi is this idea of sufficient liquidity. Traders actually want to be able to deposit their assets where there isn't much of a slippage fee, so they're able to earn yield. A lot of these liquidity pools on Uniswap are just inefficient right now because there's simply not enough capital allocated to these liquidity pools. The bigger ones are fine, but the smaller ones are really difficult. So we've summed up the 4 problems with DeFi, and we summed up 3 quick problems with CeFi. Now, what's the solution? It's fair to say that a lot of the current solutions out there, such as wrapped Bitcoin, are great substitutes or alternatives, but they're not the solution that actually provides efficiency when it comes down to actually being able to communicate between blockchains. Wrapped assets are also often centralized, so they don't really have tangible value. So in this case, the solution is Thorchain. At a simple view, Eric Voorhees simply calls Thorchain the Uniswap for all crypto assets. If I had to quickly summarize it, Thorchain is a way in which you're able to actually transact all crypto assets from all different blockchains, all on a layer 1 solution. So if I wanted to trade Bitcoin for your Ethereum or other way around, it's all done in a native asset, and there's no need to actually have any wrapped assets. And this is a really powerful solution, so let's walk through why this is the case. To break it down even further, there's no KYC, it's completely decentralized, and there's minimal fees. Thorchain considers them an independent blockchain, and it's built on the Cosmos SDK. Cosmos is a platform in which developers are able to create their own blockchains and their own custom blockchains with certain features that make it more effective. So in this case, Thorchain is actually not built on Ethereum, and it has independent blockchains where other people and developers are able to actually build on top of it. There's a lot of cool projects out right now on Thorchain, which you can check out their website, whether it's simply just price analytics tools, etc. The cool thing behind Thorchain, it actually has the ability to communicate natively with Ethereum. Now, just as a quick little background on Cosmos, and the reason why I think this is important is because now you'll be able to understand the power of true decentralization. Cosmos is one of the most interesting projects out there, and if you've heard of Polkadot, they're kind of similar. We won't get into the differences between Polkadot and Cosmos, but I'm going to link some resources here, and also in the comments below so you're able to kind of check it out and do some reading. For a high-level overview, Cosmos hosts the IBC. The IBC stands for Inter-Blockchain Communication Protocol. This simply means that your blockchain that's built on Cosmos has the ability to be able to talk to other blockchains. And this is really powerful, and you could kind of understand why the infrastructure behind Thorchain is also really important. Now, the SDK, which stands for Software Development Kit, is just a framework in which it makes it super easy for developers to build out these programs. So now we have a couple of terms covered up, whether it's Software Development Kit, Cosmos, interconnectedness, digital assets, digital exchanges, multi-chains, etc. Now let's dive more into Thorchain and kind of talk a bit about what their protocol might look like. Now the first thing that we'll do in breaking down Thorchain has to do with their liquidity pools. Liquidity pools are simply just ways that you're able to earn yield by actually giving your crypto for other people to borrow and trade off of, etc. Now Thorchain's just using pretty simple liquidity pools, whether it's trading with BNB, ETH, BTC. They offer a pretty similar UI and UX to Uniswap, so I won't go too deep into the trading aspect or the trading mechanism, but think of it just being able to trade native assets from Bitcoin to Ethereum. The next thing that we'll walk through are Thorchain nodes, and I found this to be really interesting. So right now in Thorchain, there's 35 nodes. If I hosted a Thorchain node, a really easy way to look at this is that each node has the ability to connect with a certain blockchain. So if I hosted a Thorchain node, a lot of the communication that I would have with that node specifically is with the Bitcoin blockchain. Another node that someone else might hold might just communicate right to the Ethereum blockchain. Each node is anonymized and decentralized like Bitcoin, so again, that's where the decentralization comes in. Another thing has to do with their token, and this is also extremely interesting. Their token, which is called Rune, has a lot of practicality, and I'm actually really bullish behind how they designed the token. Other than just some of the normal things that tokens might give you, whether it's in governance or just earning transactions, or if that's the fiat structure itself, there's other things that Thorchain does that makes their token actually legitimate. What interests me most is their bonding pair strategy and mechanism. Simply put, if I have $100 of Ethereum, you're also going to have to put $100 of their native token or $100 worth of Rune. This is again important because it solves the problem of insufficient liquidity pools. So think of this, whenever you enter in Ethereum, an equivalent value of Rune has to actually be in place. So now you have an increase in Ethereum, but you also have an increase in Rune, the token itself, which also increases and makes your liquidity pool deeper for the Rune token. Now, instead of something like Uniswap, where you might have to trade between two different pairs, every single pair on Thorchain has to be traded with Rune. And this was something really interesting, and Eric Voorhees points this out in his article. Now that we have a decent idea of what Thorchain does and some of the values behind how they're able to actually bridge unbridged assets, another cool thing is that you're able to earn native yield on crypto assets like Bitcoin. If you've already heard of platforms like BlockFi or Celsius, there's CeFi platforms that allow you to earn interest on top of your Bitcoin, but Thorchain does the exact same thing except as a decentralized exchange. So again, a quick breakdown of Thorchain. It's a great way to be able to actually transfer assets from any blockchain, also earn yield. It's decentralized. There's no KYC. The token and Rune token is structured very well, and the sustainability behind the project is something I'm extremely bullish on and really excited to look forward towards. One small question that I have for the Rune and the Thorchain team is understanding the ability of wider rates of adoption. A key thing to note is I want to ask the question of, would my mom ever be able to use it? And I think this is a really good question to ask when it comes down to UI, UX, branding, mission, etc. And again, super excited to kind of deep dive into this project, and hopefully this gave you a decent breakdown of Thorchain, of the values behind this platform, and really excited again for this. If you're ever interested in getting no nonsense crypto content, follow my YouTube.